I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening and those watching on cable. Just a note for the people in the audience, there are members from the Boston Globe here, photographer. They're doing an article evidently on technology and general government, so they may be walking around taking some pictures this evening. And I'm going to open the budget informational hearing, and we'll start with a presentation from Town Administrator.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to spend a few minutes, and I want to thank everyone for being here this evening. This is the board's requirement that they hold a public hearing before town meeting on the budget. And the primary focus of today's presentation is to review the budgets, review some of the assumptions that are behind the budgets, and also give you some additional information. For the members of the public that are here, it's an opportunity for you to ask questions of myself and the board, so please do take advantage of that opportunity. Just start out by just going over quickly some of the budget goals, because every year prior to the budget process beginning, Finance Administration and the Board of Selectmen develop a set of budget goals. And oftentimes the budget goals from year to year remain the same. For example, continue conservative revenue assumptions. It's really put the town in pretty good condition compared to a number of different peer communities. Maintaining level municipal services, which means that we don't have any additional monies for new programs, new services, or new jobs. Where we do have job openings, what we try to do is we try not to fill those positions, because one of the most critical things is us not to lay off our staff and our personnel. The third goal that we have is to maintain critical reserves to deal with the deterioration of the economy and possible state aid cuts. That's really vital, and it's one thing that North Reading, under the leadership of the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, has really done an outstanding job of. One of the goals that was set this year was to achieve long-term savings through labor contract negotiations. It's critical that the town spends a significant amount on cost of personnel and labor, so that if we're really looking to try to save money going forward, we need to have some discussions concerning labor contract negotiations. Another goal, which was new for this year, is to migrate to an affordable health plan. And by affordable, it means that we have to look at a plan that's a 0% increase. In the past, the town's seen increases as high as 16%. Keep in mind, for every 1%, it costs us $50,000. So if you're looking at a 2% increase in health insurance, it's $100,000. So it's really critical. That's potential budget buster, and the board directed that they wanted to have a health insurance plan with 0 increase. An additional goal was to continue to develop alternative revenue sources. We're somewhat limited in our ability to be able to do that, because we have Mass General Law that says what we can do, and most importantly, what we can't do. And so cities and towns are really, we're a ward of the state, and we have very little flexibility to raise revenues unless the state gives us permission to do so. Keep in mind that the state approves our tax rate. They stand judge and jury over that process. So if they're unhappy with something, they're unhappy with some alternative revenue, creative revenues we put together, they reserve the right to send us back to the beginning to put our tax rate together. And then the final goal was to continue the budget collaboration, which has been in place between the town and the school leaders via the financial planning team. Financial planning team has worked very well over the last 5 years in sharing information so that both town and school leaders have access to information and can use that information to make well-informed decisions. It's critical that we do so, because we are one town. We don't look at it as being a town budget and a school budget. It's a single budget that we look at, which is why it's vital that we establish that as a goal. There are other smaller goals, but I believe that those really cover the main part of it. The revenues that are applied A significant portion of what we spend is called fixed costs. So about 30% of our total revenues go toward fixed costs. What are those? They're employee benefits, debt service, regional school assessment, state and county charges, et cetera. They're the things that are below the waterline. People don't see those, but they really represent the biggest share of where the budget increases every year. It's the dilemma that people say, my taxes are going up, but I don't see any increase in services. And that purple piece of pie is the reason why. The other dollars are allocated between general government, which is all of our municipal services, and our schools. In terms of the split between the town and the schools for fiscal year 2012, 67% of the revenues would go to the schools and 33% of the remaining revenues would go to the town after we deduct out fixed costs. Fixed costs come off the top. This is a slide that the chairman had prepared last week. And what's really important to note as you look at this is the town has about $1.4 million in new revenues for next fiscal year. And if you look at the top two lines, and you kind of find your way over to the tax levy, $33,197,000, and the new growth of $200,000. The increase in those two numbers from the year before, or the current year, is about $1 million. So keep in mind that our revenues are very dependent upon property taxes. And I think that goes back to illustrate the point that we're pretty limited in terms of what we have for new revenue sources that are available. The other things that are noteworthy that are here are the state aid numbers. Those numbers come to us. They reflect the most recent numbers that came out of the House Ways and Means Committee about 2 weeks ago. As we get closer to town meeting, if those numbers change, then these numbers are going to change and they're going to affect everything in terms of what we have available for funds. Local receipts are all of our fees, user charges, any way that the town brings in money from non-traditional tax sources. So keep that in mind. Those are the pieces that comprise our revenue plan. And looking at it in really simple terms, we develop our revenue budget first. And our revenue budget drives our expense budget. It's not the other way around. In other words, we don't decide what we want to spend and then build the revenues around that. We decide what we have for available dollars, and then we build our expense budgets around that. So that's an important point for those of you who may be new to the process. That's how we handle it, and it's a revenue-driven budget. Again, just a summary of our additional revenue adjustments for next year. I talked about them. You'll note that under unrestricted state aid, it used to be called additional assistance. That's gone down. That number's gone down every single year. Every single year, probably for the last 3 or 4 years, that number keeps going down. Chapter 70 is up slightly. You'll note that on the local receipts, the two major pieces that are going to be increases is motor vehicle excise tax and local option meals tax. Hi, come on in. In terms of other revenue sources, I highlighted 2 of them that I think are significant. Additional monies from the debt or capital stabilization fund. You hear it talked about as debt stabilization. You hear it talked about as capital stabilization. But the 2012 budget is based upon an additional draw of that of $224,000. That money is divided between the town and the schools on the same 67-33 basis that we talked about earlier. The other piece that the board will consider this evening is increasing the indirects from the water department. The water department runs as an enterprise fund, and as an enterprise fund, they have their expenditures are run like a business operation. So what we do is we apportion some of their town's time to the water department expense. And a major portion of $163,000 is the cost of employee benefits that get put on the town budget. Okay, so those are really the major revenue assumptions. Those are developed by the financial planning team and through staff, through Mr. Sony's office and my office, and with the assistance of the board and the financial planning team. So these numbers aren't developed in isolation. They're developed so everyone has an understanding of where they come from. I think this is a slide that was presented last week. You'll note that fixed costs are taken off the top, $14,407,666. That portion of the budget is balanced. The general government budget, as of last week, had a $38,000 imbalance, and that includes add-backs. These are add-backs that the Board of Selectmen, in the budget hearing process, decided they merited adding back in. Those add-backs total $50,700. They're for veterans' benefits, technology, tax title, and for the library. And you'll note that the school department has a budget gap that they're working to close. The purpose of my presentation tonight is not to be discussing the school budget, but it's important for you to understand that they are independently working on closing their budget gap. This was presented again last week, cash reserves. The free cash is money, of which a portion of it will be spent on snow and ice. We have about a $610,000 snow deficit. We got to deal with that problem at town meeting. The budget doesn't anticipate any use from the stabilization fund. It does include an amount taken from the capital stabilization fund that we talked about earlier. And you'll note that on the bottom of the list is the FEMA storm reimbursement, $180,630. We're gonna use it to fund our snow deficit. So it's a combination of free cash and FEMA reimbursements to fund the snow deficit, with a small balance that will be left over for some other expenditures going into June town meeting. What I wanted to do is just spend a few minutes summarizing the expense drivers of the budget. We talked a little bit earlier about fixed costs, and these are the non-fixed cost portion of the budget. There are some fixed costs that are in there. I apologize for that. The first thing is full funding of the Quinn bill. The Commonwealth, under their most recent budget, assumes zero responsibility for the Quinn bill. Zero. So that represents an additional sum that the town has to pay. It represents the 50% share that used to be covered wholly by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and now will be covered wholly by the town of North Reading. There was a significant increase in our non-exempt debt. That's because the town is being ambitious in terms of capital projects. We haven't done some temporary borrowing in the past. What we've done is we've gone ahead and taken advantage of some of the low interest rates to do permanent borrowing. And so we have a fairly significant portion of it due in 2012, of which we will be utilizing a portion from the debt stabilization fund to offset that. Employee benefits, primarily health insurance, is up $107,000. Veterans benefits are up, as you can imagine, as the economy declines and people become in need of assistance. They depend upon our Veteran Services Office to provide that. That's money that we pay. We are reimbursed 75% of those fees. Keep in mind, these are the additional amounts. These aren't the total budgets. What we want to do is we want to do a road program. The anticipated funding for the road program is $200,000 to $250,000. It's important we stay on top of the roads. This is in addition to the Chapter 90. So this will give the town a nice amount of money going into the summer to improve some of the roads, and they need it. I get complaints every day about the conditions of the roads. Another priority that's been identified for funding is the little school boiler at a cost of $250,000, and school technology between $60,000 and $90,000. There are also a number of other items that we're reviewing that are things that we know that are out there, but they're not necessarily going to be addressed at June town meeting. Fuel and utilities is a problem. We anticipate $25,000, but by the time we get to July or by the time we get to October, that amount could be double. We just don't have a good idea of what it's going to be. Keep in mind the majority of this is for gasoline. It's not for heating our buildings. We have fixed contracts in place for heating our buildings. Police cruisers, there was an amount that was proposed for police cruisers. We will consider it at October town meeting. Salary pool. A number of our employees have elected to receive their one-time 15% longevity benefit. It's a contractual right. It's in all of the contracts that the town has, municipal contracts. So the additional cost of the salary pool is about $100,000. And it's possible that we'll be seeing some retirements that we had not anticipated, and there's a cost to buying back service at the end of one's career. We're anticipating that might cost us about $50,000. So those are things that we are keeping an eye on. Do we have solutions to all of those? We're working on them. I think as this illustrates the point about the non-exempt debt, that we see a spike in 2012, and you'll note that the debt service declines. That's not unusual. As you pay off your debt service, your debt does decline, but we'll be rolling new debt forward going